Okay, we're going to get started. Big crowd. Thanks for coming out. Welcome. I'm Dan Holling on the Badger History Group Board of Directors, and it's great to see a big showing like this for our last lecture. Reminder, those on Zoom, mute your mics and close your cameras, please. And if you have any questions, type them into the chat, and then we'll ask them at the end. And those of you who are here, silence your phones. I just did that. Avoid embarrassment there. And thanks to Heather again. She's been doing the tech for us this season of lectures, as she is tonight. It's becoming kind of a tradition to have Michael Gock end each series of lectures for us, and this is the last one for this season. And he's the author of dozens of publications on Wisconsin historical subjects, including the award-winning Powder People in Place, Badger Ordnance Works, and the Sauk Prairie. And if you've looked for that book anytime in the last decade or so, you know that it's very difficult to come by, but there's an important announcement. And this book is in the process of being reprinted and will be available again about by the end of this year. So we're looking forward to that. And what's that?
I think it's a slow process.
Yeah, of course it is. Not as slow as researching, right? But Michael is also in charge of our newsletter, which is gone through kind of a redoing, and we really like the product now. And if you would like it, think about becoming a member. It's mailed out to all of our membership, and none of this would be possible, and we couldn't keep the lights on in here, or continue our mission, our historical mission to archive and keep the memory of this place alive without donations and membership. So it's a little plug. Tonight, Mike is going to be focusing on what farm life was like from 1900 to 1942 for those who were living out here on the Sauk Prairie. And you'll have to, I shouldn't even do this, but you're going to have to forgive me in advance for this, all right? Because this is really bad. But, you know, a prolific author like Michael, you might wonder what his favorite drink is, right? An author? Well, it's Tequila Mockingbird. I warned you. So, Mike, that's all yours. It can only get better now.
You're gonna buy me one of those after we're done? Okay, good. Well, thank you for being here. It's always, I love talking about Badger. I've been taken with the subject for many years now. And also I love talking about farming. I'm not a farmer. I grew up in the city and became a journalist, and I have been talking and listening to farmers since, oh goodness, 1979, 80. So, I know enough to be dangerous. So it's going to be fun today talking about farming on the prairie, which is a wonderful place to be a farmer and to talk about farming. Okay, let's begin here. If I can hit the right button. No. Uh-oh. I thought we had it. There we go. Finally, it is slow. Okay. Now, the title of this thing is Down on the Farm, but we're going to start up. We're going up. This is a dark sky picture, and we're going back to 1900 on the prairie. And on the prairie in 1900, it was dark and it was quiet. This is what the sky was like every night. There were no yard lights. There were no ambient light from the metropolises of Sauk City and Prairie du Sac on the horizon. It was dark. And on nights when there was no moon and when it was cloudy, that cliche about, you can't see your hand in front of your face, that was true. And contrary to that, on a moonlit night, I think of the full moon of January, when there was some snow on the ground and you were out in the field, then the other cliche would applies because it was bright enough you could actually read a book. Other times, gee, this is the best you could do here with the dark sky, with stars and stars. If you came out the farm door at night, this is what you would see and looked up. Also, it was quiet. There was none of that highway noise that we have now constantly. No semi-trucks. Yeah. No souped up exhaust systems making a lot of noise. No airplanes, no helicopters. The only noises you might have heard, if the wind was right, you might have heard the train coming up from Merrimack or Baraboo back and forth, or maybe if you're on the south side of the prairie, you might hear the train coming in and out of Sauk City. It was quiet and it was dark. Well, that was in 1900, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is the beginning of the end of that quiet and that dark that took place in the years before World War II. Let's go on here. Okay. Now, first, now we've come down to the farm. We're down to earth again. And this is the farm of Walter and Edith Kinchy. It's one that's was featured on the newsletter. It's on our website. It was I guess you'd say it's the typical Sauk Prairie farm, 160 acres. They had that beautiful large house, a large barn. They had a silo, of course. Can't see it. It's on the other side of the barn. They had a milk house, of course. They had a hog shed. They had a smokehouse. They were pretty much as self-sufficient as they wanted to be. These farmers would be this way really up until 1940s. They raised all the protein they needed. And if you're of a mind to it, if somebody was a avid gardener, they could raise all the vegetables they needed too and preserve them if somebody was willing to do that. Now, in terms of farming, because farming's a business, of course, the Sauk Prairie farmers are the elite of Sauk County. That their incomes were greater than any other farmer when you go up north and over the divide into the sand towns. Their fertility, the amount they can produce doesn't at all match the prairie farmers. Same way as you go to the west, and northwest up into the hill country, the yields there, the soil is not as rich. These prairie farmers were the best that Sauk County could offer in terms of farming. In terms of the general state, they were kind of for a statistical term, they were in the first quintile, like somewhere between 10 and the 20% top earners in the state. In general, the richest farmers were the Illinois prairie farmers, the ones on the border counties, Kenosha County, then going up a little bit, Racine, Milwaukee, Waukesha, Rock, Dane. As you come north and as you go farther north, farm incomes fall off all the way to north and west Wisconsin. But the Sauk Prairie farmers were right there in that sweet spot, and they were doing very well. Now, in 1900 and really the end of World War II, that was been called the golden age of farming in the United States in general, but particularly in Wisconsin. This is a time when demand and supply matched. Farmers got a good price for their produce, and they were doing well for just about all of those years, now up until after World War I. The one reason, of course, these farmers were doing so well is that they were dairymen. Like most of Wisconsin farmers, they had completed this conversion to focusing on dairying. And this photo here comes from the annual reports of the county agent, guy named Charles Kirch. He started here in 1934, and he and his successor, guy named Dave Williams, their job was to compile annual reports of farming in the county, and they had to be illustrated with photos. And they're in the archives in Madison, and there's this wonderful collection of photos. So you're going to see a lot of them. This one, of course, is of a Guernsey cow, prime milker, and this was the ideal cow that farmers were supposed to have to improve their income. As you can see, good dairy cattle increase farm income. That's Charles Kirch's typewritten caption in his report. And this was a process that had been going on in Wisconsin since the 1880s. William Hord, the newspaper and magazine man, he was an advocate. He said that if you don't have a purebred animal, don't farm, don't go into dairying. So on the prairie, farmers they had Guernseys. A few of them had Jerseys. Jerseys were smaller, produced less milk, but it was a high butterfat content that was popular among some. In fact, I can remember in the 1970s, you could go to the supermarket and you could buy AJ milk. Anybody else remember that? You could buy milk solely from Jersey cattle. Also, of course, on the prairie, the Guernseys were very popular, and then so were Holsteins, but they come with more later on. They're more popular as time goes on. Now, in the 1910 census was the first year, I got to look at my notes here, that there were more cows than people in Sauk County. 1914, Wisconsin truly became America's dairyland. Wisconsin then produced more milk, more cheese, and more butter than any state in the Union. Stole the title from New York, surprisingly, and of course, California as a dairy area hadn't even been heard of yet. Now, one of the reasons, of course, Wisconsin was America's dairyland was it was also America's silo land. For some reason, Wisconsin was the only state in the Union that did a census of silos. And we found out that in this period of time, in the teens, Wisconsin had more silos than any state in the Union. And the reason you wanted a silo was that it could produce the amount of feed you could provide your cattle by 20, sometimes even 50%. Some enthusiasts like Hord would say, oh, if you do silage properly, you will be able to raise 2 cattle for every one you could raise otherwise. On the photo here, it's just a photo. It's not from Sauk County, the one of the wooden silo. I just like it. It is the coolest silo I've seen. It is octagonal and it is wood stave. Somebody stacked those boards up one at a time and go round and round. Of course, they probably lined it with tar paper because that's what they did. That's an early silo. On the other hand, we're looking at that nice concrete silo that's on the title for her. This was Mary Royk's farm. That was the title. And let me see, where am I getting it here? It was about, I'm looking to, oh, there it is. Yes, 50 feet high and 12 feet. And once you fill that silo with corn stalks, you of course had the equivalent of, you added more land to your farm. If having a silo, feeding silage, it was the equivalent of adding, if you had 40-acre field, having a silo meant you had a 50-acre field. And this is a graphic here in the center from a 1923 census of silos in Wisconsin. And I don't know why they use dots. They could have just printed a number, but anyway, if you wanted to count the dots and multiply times 50, then you know how many silos there were. Now, all of this happened on the prairie in really about 20 years. There were a few silos before 1900, but really by 1920, because of that conversion to dairying, because it was so important, every farm had a silo. Now, here's another one. Now, as I said, the dairy cow was the queen of farming on the prairie. And here, look at this one has a crown of horns, even. But if she was the queen, the princess was this black hog down there in the corner. That's a brood sow. Now, about anywhere from a half to 3/4 of farm income came from dairying on the prairie, and the rest of it came from hogs. There was a constant procession, if you want to call it that, of wagons and later trucks taking hogs to the market in Sauk City, the stockyards, and off they went to Chicago or Milwaukee. Hogs were a cash crop for these farmers. By the way, if you would look on a farm nowadays, a modern pork producing farm, you wouldn't find a hog that looked like that. She's too fat. She's not lean enough, not long enough, and she's a heritage breed. I'm afraid I don't know. I can't help you on that. I don't know what breed she is. Like I know the Guernsey cows. Also, Sauk County was apple country. Here we go. Kurt's here. In 1913, Sauk was the #1 apple growing county in Wisconsin. Now, it fell off over time, but at one time, even by 1940, there were 31,000 apple trees in the county, and just about every farmer had one. It's an old American tradition. You grew apples in Wisconsin because first of all, they were cold hardy. In those days, we didn't have all the breeds that we have now of apples and other fruits that are hardy, cold hardy. In those days, you wanted to grow fruit. In Wisconsin, you grew apples, maybe some plums as well. But if you wanted to grow peaches, well, you ought to be in Georgia. And what else did they grow? Am I getting it? Okay. Now, what do they grow? Corn was their main crop. It was not hybrid corn like this. It was open pollinated corn, traditional, and you would not see the corn so close together. The stalks would be spaced out because there weren't all of those additives and things that now go into modern growing of corn. The next crop, they all grew oats. Oats was feed for the livestock, for the horses, of course, and of course provided straw. And the other one, this is the one that you don't even know if you see this anymore. This is Timothy grass. That's why I put the Latin in, Phalum pratense. This, by all accounts, was the finest feed for horses. And farmers on the prairie kept growing it until they gave up on their horses. It was called Timothy grass because, so the story goes, the man who brought it from England to the United States was Timothy Hansen. So it was Timothy's grass. Colonial times was also known as English grass, since it came from England. So this is what they were growing. You notice there are no soybeans. Alfalfa doesn't come around until the 1930s. And all of this food that they raised, pretty much it stayed right on the farm. There wasn't really a market. There wasn't an ethanol plant for the corn. All of this stayed. They were self-sufficient in that sense that they didn't need to worry about an international market, at least for the feed that they raised for their own animals. Okay, and I mentioned, of course, the cows and the hogs, and also now the horses. This is another photo from the county agent report. This is 1936. This is a plowing contest that took place on, let's see, just across Highway 33 from where the county fairgrounds is. As obviously it wasn't developed in those days. And there were two categories in this contest, a 5-horse hitch and a 2-horse hitch. And contests like this were not unusual. The trick here was not to go fast. The trick was you were a good plowman if your furrow was straight and turning. Think of what it took to turn a 5-horse hitch. We can only imagine it, unless some of you have tried to steer a buggy or a wagon. They had to turn it just right and then hit on the other side, hit the furrow just right, so you would turn, so you wouldn't waste time, you wouldn't waste land. Essentially, you had to hit it just right, and that's why they had contests. The winner of this contest won $10. I'm afraid the attendance was disappointing. The weather was miserable. They held it anyway, and only about 50 spectators showed up, which is unusual because plowing contests, I've read, could attract hundreds of people, thousands. Well, they consoled themselves. They all went down to the Congregational Church in Baraboo and had a hot dinner. Horses were important and remained important, a part of farming on the prairie until after World War II. Here we go. Tractors were coming on. I saw this ad for the Wisconsin tractor, of course, which was made in Sauk City. This is Earl McFarland's. Before they became McFarland's, he was the Wisconsin tractor. Survived from about 1919, 1924. He said he made about 600 tractors, big 6,000-pound tractors. And of course, he could not compete with the big guys, with John Deere. The tractor in the corner there is the model John Deere 37, made in the 1930s, and this is the tractor that Walter Kinchy used. Not that a model like that, of course. And you could see how small that tractor is in the center photo, and it's slowly working its way through the field. But for heavy work and for winter transportation, all the way up to World War II, farmers needed horses. Okay, now I said that the period before World War I was a golden era, golden age for farming, not just in the United States, but on all of Wisconsin, but also, of course, on the Sauk Prairie. However, there was a problem. And the lyric here I've got on there is actually a song that was popular during World War I. And it talks about the soldiers who had served and how you gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Prairie. They'll never want to see a rake or a plow, and who the deuce can parlez-vous a cow? How you gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Prairie? Well, you could change the lyric there and go back before World War I and say, how are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Milwaukee, or after they've seen Kenosha with its auto plant, Racine with its tractor plant? Any one of the industrial cities in Wisconsin and elsewhere were pulling people off the farms, not just men and women as well. And the numbers on the bottom tell the story there. Those are population figures for the town of Sumter. In 1900, there's 724 people. 589, 20% drop almost by 1920. And by 1940, the number really doesn't change. And the reason for that was that farm life was tough. It was hard. Manual labor. These women in this photo here, this is from the Sauk County Historical Society, and I'm sorry I can't identify them. And they're kind of, they're mugging for the camera. However, there's a real story here. You look at this one woman, she's carrying a can of probably kerosene. And she's the one, she's showing that you got to take care of those oil lamps. They were dull, dirty, and dangerous. But they were the best they had on the farm, and someone had to take care of them on a daily basis. It's also the woman in the center, she's carrying all that firewood. Well, that's because there was a lot of manual labor. Just related for the prairie farmers, most of them had either owned land on the bluff or they had access to, so they could cut firewood. And now that was a lot of work. You had to fell the tree, buck the tree, split the tree, haul it down, stack it, and then bring it into the house. And the last there in this trinity, this woman has a shovel. Well, maybe it's a snow shovel. I really can't tell. But it's symbolic of the kind of work. Everything was manual labor, or you could get an animal to help you out, a horse, usually. Let me see. I got a quote here. There was a woman named Nellie Kedzie Jones. She was really she was a university person and kind of the founder of what became the University Extension homemakers. She said that a man's day in the farm, a man's day begins shortly before breakfast. A woman's day begins yesterday, meaning that it was never done. It was never done. And so it's not surprising that they wanted to leave. In one of Erhard Miller's books, there is a list. There is a list of all the distinguished people who left the prairie, became PhDs, became medical doctors, were successes in urban life. In fact, one that we know very well is Donald Kinchy, Dr. Donald Kinchy. He was born on the prairie in 1911. He left, and of course, we know he came back, but since he wanted to be a doctor, he left. Just like many, many, many others left. There was a remedy to this, they hoped. People recognized this was a crisis, that rural areas were in trouble. And President Theodore Roosevelt, who used the bully pulpit as he often did, and he called a country life conference in Washington, D.C. in 1908, and he appointed a commission to study the problem. Well, this filtered out through the states, and of course, this was the beginning days of the Wisconsin idea, where the university, the boundaries of the university are the boundaries of the state, particularly in terms of agriculture. And so there was a country life conference held in Madison in 1911. And its purpose there, as it says, while farming is a profession, a vocation, living is more than farming. And country living should mean the expression of the fullest possible life. So that was the purpose of the country life music movement. One of the adherents of this, or advocates for it, was a man named William Toole, who had a farm outside of Baraboo. He organized the Skillet Creek Farmers Club. And what he said is that we have to come together because we don't know our neighbors. Farmers don't get together, which that's a kind of a surprise to me, but that's what he said. Now, out of this country life music movement, later on came Forage and the Extension Homemakers Group. I don't know, they probably have another name now, but that's what they were called a few years back. And so this photo on the bottom, I love this. Again, it's from the Ag Report from 1940. And this is the all-county 4-H junior chorus. They're all there together at the fair, and they're going to sing. Now, these kids probably never sang together as a group because they were all scattered all over the county. But this was important enough, they were going to come together and sing at the county fair. In fact, somebody even, probably some parents made sure that piano was moved for them out there. And this started with the country life movement back in the tens and went on. Of course, 4-H and homemakers are still around today. Now, there were other things going on that really helped us to end, I guess you would say, or ameliorate the farm crisis, the problem of living on the farm. Well, there it is, the automobile. before I talk about that automobile, though, this is another, I just love this photo. It's not Sauk County, I'm afraid. It's from a glass plate negative. It's just, and there's those people, they're saying goodbye. I don't know what kind of car it is, but you'll notice that the steering wheel is on the right-hand side. In the corner, the other photo up there is of what was known as the Lucas Gusher. It erupted in about 1901 on the Spindletop oil field in what was eastern Texas. It gushed 100,000 barrels of oil a day for 9 days before they could cap it. They weren't worried too much about oil spills then. And what it did, it ushered in the era of cheap oil and abundant oil. It wasn't until they hit it big in Texas that we really had all the fuel that was needed for these cars. These people here couldn't say goodbye, as it says on the photo, unless they had access to that oil. Funny how some things don't change. Well, in 1905, Wisconsin had about 1,400 registered vehicles. Most of them were cars. There were maybe 100 of them in Sauk County. By 1922, not even 20 years, there were over 360,000 vehicles, licensed vehicles in Wisconsin, and Sauk alone had about 5,500. Almost all of them were cars. By 1920, trucks had not developed really enough where they were spread out throughout the countryside, but everybody had a car, especially if you were a rural person. And here we go. This is a scene from 1940. This is a stock sale at the county fair. And the reason I selected this photo, well, there's 250 people came up to buy Holstein cattle, I think it was. And you'll notice they all came in cars. Those are some nice cars there, all streamlined. I'm particularly fond of that coupe in the center there with the spare tire on the bumper. But my point in showing you this is that this is what happened in a very short time, relatively speaking. We talk about the adoption of new technology, electronic technology in the last, 40 years? Well, it happened before with the automobile as well. But before the automobile could become widespread like that, some work had to be done. The Wisconsin Constitution, the one that was adopted in the 1840s, prohibited the state from spending tax money on, quote, internal improvements. So the state did not fund highways. The state did not fund bridges. All of that was funded locally. Counties did a little bit. Well, of course, the bridges at Sauk City and Prairie du Sac, they were funded locally by the villages and the towns in the vicinity. This particular photo is well, it's kind of a mystery, but Wisconsin amended its constitution in 1908 and allowed the use of state tax money for, quote, internal improvements, for highways and bridges. Also mandated very few years later, legislation mandated that every county have a highway commission, and that state money and then later on federal money could be used to build highways. I found this photo in the Sauk County Historical Society, and I asked Bill Schutte to send it to me. He didn't know anything about it. But if you look at it, it is a gravel pit. The horses up there are doing the hard work of scraping the gravel out, and those are two rock crushers, and that's a lineup of trucks. Bill, when he sent it to me, he said, just for the heck of it, he asked ChatGPT to colorize it. Mm. And so that's what the robot said. That's what it looked like in color back, and this is from the mid-1920s, because that's when the highway construction began at both the local and the state and the federal level for that matter. And like I said, we know it's from Sauk County. I don't know if it's the county highway department or it's a contractor. Anyway, they're going to do road work with that gravel that they're crushing. This one is another I like this photo a lot, so I threw it in. This is the dedication for the bridge in 1921 at Sauk City. The arrow there indicates the Governor Emanuel Phillip, who had just left office, but he was responsible for funding the bridge. And so they invited him to speak at the dedication. It was a hot summer day. And you'll see there's a man with an umbrella behind him, and he's holding that up. That's Joe Dreesen, the village president. And his job is to keep shade on the governor. Philip was a large man. And when he spoke, he liked to travel. He liked to walk around. And so Dreesen trailed around with him, keeping him in the shade, keeping him cool because it was a warm day. Now, this was the Sauk City Bridge, 1921. But Prairie to Sac got its bridge in 1919. Beat Sauk City. There was a dedication ceremony there, and one of the speakers at that dedication was a young attorney named William Ryan. Ryan was a native of West Point across the river, and he started practicing. He was only, again, a young man in 1919 when he spoke at the Prairie to Sac Bridge dedication. 20 years later, Ryan went on to he represented about 3/4 of the prairie farmers who lost their land to Badger Ordnance. Coincidence, things happen. And this is the 1934 official state highway map. You will notice that Highway 12 is paved. It was a main federal artery from the beginning of federal funding for roads in 1916. In 1925, as part of the upgrade, they finally decided what was going to be the route up the bluff to Baraboo. And it's the present one we have now. And there was a big dedication, and the road was paved, like I said. But you will notice 78 was not. It was only, let's see what the legends say, that the road is surfaced, but not always usable. Something like that. That's the dotted line ones. You will notice, though, Mike, you will notice this, that there's the road to Denzer is on this map. It's just a sand road. County C is on it. So roads changed life on the farm. And here's one of the things, both electricity and the car. This is the premiere of the movie Birth of a Nation at the Al Ringling Theater in March of 1916. This was a big deal. The Birth of a Nation was the most popular movie of its time. And some people will say today that more people have seen this movie than any other movie ever made. Now, we know, of course, this is the racist story of the Ku Klux Klan, but it was a big deal here. 4 days it ran. The railroad ran special excursions so that the country folk could, up the line and down the line, could come and see it. And it was the Ringling Theater that got it, because really, the Ringling had just opened. The movie was brand new, and yet still it played in what would really be a small town. And of course, I like this photo because it talks, you see that what they used to advertise it. They used that car. That was another of the times. You drive a car down roads that have recently been repaired, and you advertise this movie. That was in 1916. Now, the Ringling was not the first movie theater in the county. There was another one in Baraboo going back to, about 1908 or so. There was the Electric Theater in Sauk City. The Electric Theater was, let me get my check. I always got to check dates. I don't remember dates anymore. Anyway, the Electric Theater came along in 1911. It was in a lodge hall on Water Street in Sauk City, not in a theater. And the projector was of course electric, but the electricity was generated by a small gasoline engine in the basement. And the Birth of the Nation didn't show up there until until 1918, but it came back and it was popular. Well, the electric theaters survived until about, 1924 or so, when by then the Bonham Theater in Prairie du Sac had opened, and it was a real theater in 1920. So instead of going to a lodge hall and sitting on folding chairs to see a movie, folks went to the Bonham. And now, when I talk about how quiet and how dark it was back there on the prairie, well, now you didn't have to stay out there. You had someplace to go. You could go to a movie, and you had a car to take you there, and you had roads that were passable, at least most of the time. Change. Well, then the other change comes in the form of electricity. This is, of course, we all know this. This is the Prairie du Sac Dam. And the Prairie du Sac Dam was really developed it was the last one in what was the first wave of what was called hydromania on the Wisconsin River. Between the late 1890s up until this dam was built and finished in 1914, every water power site up the Wisconsin River, most of them were old lumber mill sites, had a power plant on it. The whole river was dammed. Same thing happened to the Fox River and the Chippewa. In this period, every river that could be dammed and a power plant placed on it, it happened. Even on smaller ones, Baraboo, Reedsburg, Laval had little power plants on the river. Mauston up on the Lemonweir, and even Little Friendship. 500 people lived in Friendship, and there's a creek there, and there was a hydro power plant there. Now, the Prairie du Sac Dam, and likewise the Dells Dam, which were the last two, they were built in places, unlike the other dams, where there was no market for their power. I mean, this was the biggest plant on the Wisconsin River, and Sauk City and Prairie du Sac and all of the county couldn't provide enough demand for this. So actually, the initial builder went broke, and the predecessor, Wisconsin Power and Light, acquired it, and they stayed in business by building a transmission line to Watertown and sending the electricity to run street railroads in the Milwaukee area. That was the brief era of trolleys and street railways throughout the country, and that's how the Prairie du Sac Dam stayed in business. Now, the story goes, Earhart tells us this wonderful story. In about 1916, 17, a prairie farmer named Fred Waffenschmidt came into the power plant, and he met Grover Neff, who was the engineer. Neff went on to become the president of Wisconsin Power and Light, and he's the man who consolidated the whole system in the 1920s. Waffenschmidt said, well, why can't we farmers have power if you're generating all this here? And Neff, again, I'm quoting Earhart, Neff said, well, we don't have any money. But if you can put up the poles, can run the wire, well, we'll supply the electricity. And they did. There was an East Sumter Electric Company and a West Sumter Electric Company a year later. And they were little stock companies. Every farmer put in $200. They ran the poles themselves, ran the wire themselves, and the electric company did put in whatever transformers, whatever they needed. And by 1918, the prairie farmers had electricity. Now, this was a good 20 years, maybe not 20, 15, 20 years ahead of farmers just a little bit to the west, a little bit to the north, and even some to the east for that matter. They had to wait for the REA to come along in the 1930s. And this added, of course, these prairie farmers, they were already, as I said, the best in the county. And the fact that they had electricity made it even better. They could have lamps. These are pages out of the Sears catalog. They could have those lamps, electric lamps, instead of those oil lamps. They could have plumbing. they could, later on in the 1930s, they could listen to the radio. In fact, they could listen to the Franklin Roosevelt's fireside chats in the early 1930s, when just somebody over the county line in Richland County couldn't, or certainly someone up in Juneau County couldn't, even the northern towns. I have to, just a minute, I tell a story. I know I'm going long here, but I'll keep moving. Many years ago, I interviewed a country vet from Portage. His name was John Curtis. And he didn't practice in Sauk, but he practiced over there. And he went to visit one of his farm clients, I guess you'd say. And the farm had just gotten electricity. And so Doc Curtis pulled in the driveway. The farmer came and said, "Oh, wait, Doc, I'll just wait there. I'll be right with you." And he ran into the house. A couple of minutes, 15 minutes passed. Farmer came out, and Curtis saw that he had clean clothes on, and he had washed up. He had taken a bath, taken a shower. And this is a farmer in the middle of the workday. And Curtis said to him, well, you didn't have to clean up just for me. And he said, "No, I didn't clean up just for you. I took a shower because I could." That's what electricity brought to these farmers, no matter where they were. And going back up to 1942, when there was that period of time when the farmers had to leave and the buildings were still there, and Earhart tells the story also. There were a few people who went back to their farms and removed fixtures, because the way the terms of the sale were that if it was screwed down, nailed down, it was part of the house and you couldn't take it with. Well, these guys went back and they took some of their stuff. They took lighting fixtures because it was, and maybe, they did it because, well, we paid for it, so we want it. But I actually think they were doing it because that was a symbol of how progressive they were, how wealthy, how comfortable they were. And they didn't want to leave that behind. Electricity. Okay. Now I'm moving this. I'm going to go through a quick period here. This is few years, April 1917, November 1920, lots of stuff happens. The United States enters World War I. And the farmers who are already doing well are doing better, because war in Europe, as a rule, is good for American farmers until the United States enters it. But even then, it was good. So 1917, April, the United States entered the war. The war ended in November of 1918. So the United States was in it for about 19 months. However, Sauk County was considered part of the German belt and therefore may be suspicious. Now, I think, well, somebody's named Waffenschmidt, somebody's named Stedman. There's a Huber, there's a Keller. However, the people who were adults by this time, their grandparents, often cases, had migrated. They were about as German as you and I are. However, they were suspect because of that. Didn't help, of course, for some people that the congressman from this district, who the Sauk County supported, was a man named John Ench. He was one of the 9 congressional reps from Wisconsin who joined Senator La Follette in voting against American entry into the war. So there's another reason to be suspicious in those patriotic times. Patriotic, quotes on that, patriotic. Another thing that happened in this period, in the fall of 1918 and really into November, just when the war was ending, the flu hit. It hit in November, particularly of 1918, and then suspended in the winter and then came back in the spring of 1919. Looks familiar, they're wearing that mask, huh? The flu was a serious problem for people in cities, less so for people in the country. However, 8,500 people throughout, I'm sorry, I don't have local numbers. 8,500 people in Wisconsin died of the flu. That was more than died in World War I. Wisconsin residents. Another thing happened, more bad news. Oh my goodness. Prohibition. In August of 1919, the 18th Amendment was passed. The Sauk City Brewery here had to close. Effinger Brewery in Baraboo had to close. The Baraboo's name I forget, was it Ruland? The name I forget in Reedsburg had to close. Now, the prohibition was on the sale, but not necessarily on the manufacture. And I mentioned earlier that, you know, that the number of apple trees was declining in Sauk County in this period. But you know what? The number of grapevines went up because it was certainly legal to make all the wine you wanted. Other things were happening to just around the line here. Women, the right of women to vote was recognized in August of 1920. And the first election that Wisconsin, well, American women could vote in was the presidential election of 1920. Another thing going on. And finally, when the war ended, this farm problems in 1919, all those good years, those good years came to an end. There was a post-war recession because there was oversupply. Farmers had planted everything. All of a sudden, there was no demand anymore. And this, the 1920s, known as, you know, times of prosperity, roaring, and all of that, there is a slow farm crisis. Now, Sauk farmers, again, because they're better than most, they're feeling it less. But farmers in other parts, particularly in other parts of Sauk County, you go up north to the Sand County, you know, there is a reason why Aldo Leopold was able to buy an abandoned sand farm, because those people were going out of business in the 20s. Here is a page out of the county agent's report. You could see the number that matters. Look at 1927. This is for the whole county, $9 million, $9,620,000. By 1931, the income had fallen to 5,070. By 1930, you see it bottomed, 4,000. And then the arrow points to just the averages. Look at that, from $2,600 down to $1,100. Now that's an average. Now you remember this: the prairie farmers were above always. You know, an average is 50 above, 50% above, 50 below. The prairie farmers were always a little, and how much above I don't know. But in any event, you could see this is a crisis when your income falls almost 60%. And there were plenty of people who were unhappy about it. 1933, the dairy crisis really hit. The milk strikes and farm holiday. They were two separate things. There was the milk pool, that what they were called. They were local. They were more diffused around the state, and they called for strikes for the dumping of milk, and in some cases, not just dumping your own milk, but also stopping other farmers from delivering milk to dairies. The photos here are, let's see, the one is from Burlington area, which is near Racine. The other one is from Shawano, another one is from Kewanee. And these are not poor farmers. They're doing just as well as the Sauk County farmers are, but they're hurting. I think of how desperate these men were that they did this. In some cases, well, they were concerned. The government overreacted here. Governor Schmiedemann, who, by the way, whose right-hand man was a man named Leo Crowley, who later became a federal official who said he was responsible for locating the powder plant on the prairie. Anyway, to go back here, Schmiedemann and Crowley offered sheriffs access to National Guard troops, and this is up in Shawano, that they were defending maybe a creamery. And I think, gosh, they got 1933, they got a war surplus machine gun that they mounted that was aimed maybe at farmers. Now, in Sauk, there wasn't none of this action occurred. There was some, let's see, there were some people who stopped farmers from bringing milk to the Gem City dairy up in Baraboo. There were other farmers who stopped their neighbors from bringing milk to the Kilburn Co-op Creamery up in Wisconsin Dells. But as far as we know, the Sumter Creamery and the creamery in Sauk City were not assaulted, I guess you would say. This was the milk pool in 1933. There were 3 attempts this way, and they of course failed. There was also the Farm Holiday Movement, which was a national movement to have farmers strike nationally. It was led by a man named Milo Reno. It's a great name. He was an Iowa man, and he actually spoke in Baraboo to a rousing crowd at the fairgrounds to rally farmers to take a holiday. Well, 1933, in March of 1933, Franklin Roosevelt is inaugurated. He's the last president to be inaugurated in March instead of January. He's there in the center. If you look way over to the far side, you'll see Eleanor is over there. She's not very close. Anyway, Roosevelt is inaugurated in March of 1933, and everything changes on the farm. He passes, first of all, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. Supreme Court says it's unconstitutional. They come back with the Agricultural Conservation Program, ACP. And what it does, there is this raft of programs. The most important one, the one that came immediately, was the one called, what I have here is corn hog. Get my notes here. Sorry, I'm talking faster than I'm looking. Okay, county agent, right. Also, by the way, this is when Sauk finally hired a county agent. They got federal money to pay for him. Corn hog payments. Now, in 1934, immediately, the federal government said they would buy 25% of every hog herd in the county. They would also pay for farmers not to raise corn. In 1934, first payment was in 34, $300,000 came into the county for these programs. As time went on, those numbers fluctuated a little bit, but there was always hundreds of thousands of dollars coming into the county to provide relief for farmers on all of these many programs. I mentioned Bang's disease, which is also brucellosis, it was called Bang's disease in those days. It was brucellosis, and it was a terrible disease, and farmers and the university, particularly the ag agents, worked to eliminate it. It mattered a lot because about 1935, Sauk City and Prairie du Sac passed an ordinance saying you could not sell milk in the villages unless you could prove your cows were free of brucellosis. There were all these other programs. I'm not going to go through all of them. The one I am going to mention, though, is the resettlement. Resettlement was a program that was really focused on what was called submarginal farmers. The closest it really got to Sauk County was up in Juneau County. The land for the Necedah Wildlife Refuge was taken, and the Resettlement Administration helped the farmers find new places. A lot of that state land in Jackson County was acquired the same way. The connection here to Sauk is that there was a resettlement committee here, and they didn't do much work. Where they did some work would in those northern towns, in those Badlands north of Reedsburg, as they were called, in the Sand counties. But there was a committee, of course, as there were usually with all these things. And one of the people on the committee was a woman named Elizabeth Primo. She was the wife of Garth Primo, who, of course, was the town chair of Sumter at the time, and at least a nominal leader of the resistance against the powder plant. I think there's a, what is poetic coincidence? I don't know that. Here's this woman in charge of resettlement, or at least part of the people in charge of resettlement in Sauk County later becomes, has to resettle herself. So here we go. We're at the end here. It's 1941. It's a golden summer. There is a corn huskers contest that drew 3,000 people. County, look at them. Let's see. Marvin Nolden is the man from Sauk City. He's probably, that's certainly a prairie name, isn't it? These things were common. This type of when there was a regional 3-county, that if you won the local, the county, you moved to the next. And then there was a statewide corn husking contest. And in Madison, in that year, it attracted 15,000 people. There were also, I wish I had a photo, there were also a corn harvesting contest where farmers would line up and there'd be a wagon going through the field ahead of them a little bit or with them. And they would have a corn knife. Corn has not a sickle, it's a knife it's a handle with a blade on it. And you would cut the cob off the corn, off the stalk rather, and throw it into the wagon. And the wagon was equipped with a board down the center, kind of like a 4x8 sheet of plywood running the way. And it was like a backboard. And so you'd walk and throw the corn and walk and throw the corn and walk and throw the corn. And the person who, of course, harvested the most corn won the prize. And this was another event that attracted thousands of people at this time. I'm sorry, I don't have one. And of course, we have the photo of the 4-H here of the Sumter 4-H Club. They're parading their Holsteins at the 4-H parade at the county fair in 1941. Well, we know what happens. Then things change. This is the auction bill for Walter and Edith Kinchy for their farm. It's similar actually to the one right up here. And what it does is it's actually a summary of pretty much what I've said. Because what they're selling high grade. They make it a point to point it out. High grade Holstein cattle. They're selling purebred Chester white sows, brood sows. They're selling 2 teams, well, actually 1 team of mules, span of mules, and a team of horses, 2 of them, but only 1 tractor. They're selling only 1 tractor. They have a lot of equipment, but they're only selling 1 tractor, but two teams of horses. Well, mule and horse. They're also selling some alfalfa, which they were by the 1930s, 1940s, farmers were growing alfalfa. I guess all the Timothy, he either quit growing it or he wasn't selling it. Anyway, the Kinchys, Walter and Edith did quit farming. That's why they sold everything out. And that was it. The powder plant came, and all that these folks had built over these years was gone. And so am I. So thank you. Ask if there are any questions, shouldn't there? Have we got any questions? No? Yeah. Oh, yeah, we do have some. Okay, yes.
So at the beginning, you were talking about keeping them down on a farm, but did that really result in labor shortages? Because other parts of the world, if you wanted to make a living and you didn't inherit the farm, you had to go somewhere else to make a living.
It's true.
And from what was actually going on, did it result in, was people leaving the farm resulting in labor shortages, or
no, I don't think so. I think that they had enough people, that there were enough people who stayed, and it was surplus population that left.
Okay.
Yeah, whether they were men or women. Another one, yes.
Well, just out of curiosity, following your pictures, when did Wisconsin farmers or the Sauk farmers change from Jerseys, Guernseys to Holsteins?
Well, it was a process that was going on, was ongoing in this period. And it really, as time goes on in the after World War II, there's that switch occurs. But it's a rather slow thing. But Ori, you're the expert on those Holsteins. They ended up producing more milk, right?
More milk.
More milk.
Less fat.
More milk, less fat, which was what was wanted in a more modern market. Back prior to World War II, butter fat mattered.
For the families who lived on the Sauk Prairie at this time, how long have their families been here? Like, for how many generations? If it ended in 1942, when did some of them first settle here in the?
Well, there were some who were here from the 1840s on. But of course, land changed over time. Some came and some there was in many places there was kind of an ethnic shift that a lot of the first settlers here were, quote, Americans. And over time, more Europeans settled in, Swiss and Germans. The Primo family came from Canada. I think they were French Canadian. But that's over time. By about the 1900s, they're pretty settled. There's not a lot of change going on. Yes.
What, do you know the date that people were notified that they were gonna have to leave their farm?
It was in January 42. I'm sorry, I don't remember the date.
When did they have to?
It's in my book. Anyway, and they all received a registered letter at the same day. They all received an offer from the federal government with a price. And to make the offer legit, some money had to change hands. So they gave them all $1. There was $1 in but that's, that's not unusual. You make an offer, you put the money down, they put $1 down. That was in January, around January 19, January 20, sometime around there. And they were given a deadline that they had to be gone by March 1st. Yeah. That was, that was after the first offers were made in November of 41. And most of the farmers said no. And so the federal government turned to condemnation, eminent domain. And that's when they had the final deadline. Then there was no recourse other than, well, you could appeal that offer. That's what condemnation meant. There was a condemnation court. And actually many of the farmers, when they went to the condemnation process, they actually ended up with more money, 10%, 25% more. But they did that only because they stood up and resisted the government. Yes. Well, let's see. Was it 80 some? Yeah. 90. The numbers are hard, because there's the property, there's 100 and some pieces of property, and some are small, some are, Yes.
When you have those images of the milk dumping, at that time, was there the National Farmers Organization, NFO, was that in existence?
I don't think the NFO was organized then. I thought that's a post-war, I'm not sure, but I think that's a post-World War II organization. The group that was involved there would have been the Farmers Union and the Farm Bureau, which is pretty conservative. But it's funny how in reading about the milk pool, as they were called, they were almost spontaneous local groups that got together and said, we're going to do this. And it isn't like there was some statewide mastermind calling the shots. It reminds me of the No Kings demonstration that take place now, that there isn't really a big national mastermind behind it. They're local. Oh, Frank.
You had a picture there of the Prairie Sac Dam,
Mm-hmm.
and on the side, was the golf course there then?
No, let's look.
It is sort of off the.
Let's see if we can go back there. That's one of the
That
golf course. Oh,
golf course that old? Looks like a golf course.
Well, I don't know how old, could be, I don't know how old this photo is. It's just,
Oh,
I,
okay. I assume this photo was the 1920. But maybe.
could be, yeah, but it was just a convenient photo to use to.
It looks like a golf course there.
Oh, I don't know, could be, I don't know, yes.
Were they harvesting ice in the county at this time? I mean, for refrigerators, where did they harvest their ice from?
Well, now that I don't know, that,
They
that
would have had to have done something. right?
they would have harvested, ice could have been. I don't know, did they harvest ice on Devil's Lake?
Yeah.
Yeah, did they harvest, once the dam was built, did they harvest ice on Lake Wisconsin? Did they harvest ice in the Baraboo River?
Caledonia Township where I grew up.
Uh-huh,
It's a state natural area.
oh. Okay. Yes,
My mother and father-in-law bought a farm on the east side from the army. When I was remodeling the house, in the attic, there was a can that was hammered onto with a nail onto a, one of the beams.
mm-hmm,
And when I looked at it, I thought, well, I know there's no money in it. But when I took it off, I found a whole bunch of legal letters that dealt with the building of the silo, the wooden silo for the farm.
mm-hmm,
The farmer went into Prairie du Sac to get, tell them that they wanted a farm, wanted a silo. And they brought out all of the equipment, all of the wood and roofing and all of the metal work that was there. And they said they'd be out on Friday. And so the farmer had all the farmers come in and bring their food, and they were going to be having a great day putting up a silo, and they didn't come. And so he went into town and found out that the next week, it'll be on Wednesday. And so they called up, all the farmers around, and they did the same thing. And potlucks in, the farmers community were really great.
mm-hmm.
They didn't come again. And so he went into Baraboo and got, the place in Baraboo to come out with all of the same equipment and put it all up. And the people from Prairie du Sac gave them, a bill for all the stuff that they had taken out but didn't use. And so, and this was during the, the 30s when, money was scarce.
Yeah.
And so the Prairie du Sac place sold that bill to somebody, and then they wrote a real nasty letter saying you have to pay this, and he wasn't going to.
Mm-hmm.
And it went from one place to another. Each time the new person with the bill wrote a real nasty letter and saying, this is what we're going to do. And they kept it. And they put it in that pail for that can. And we're waiting for them to come because they had a good case in which they did not have to pay it.
Huh.
And that was interesting because the silo was gone by the time, it was taken down. But that was a little interesting thing.
Yeah. Yes, Michael.
And so the history book has in the archives an interview with people describing what it was like for farmers when electricity was coming and they had to put up the poles and learn how to connect them and get shocked.
Okay.
Was the dam one of the main drivers of like site selection to the power plant then? Just the
Well,
Access power.
in that water was essential, but, and so, yes, all these powder plants were always built near to a waterway. And of course, Lake Wisconsin was a great big reservoir. But the first criteria was rail transport.
getting
Yeah, and there were the two railroads and because they had to get everything in out and trucks weren't in common use. Everything came in at Badger, everything came in and out by rail until 1970s. Yes,
It's interesting going into the old farmhouses that had a cement lock. And on that lock, they would have a generator for electricity. And that's what happened before they got the lines in.
well, that was another thing I really didn't get into because when I was talking about the automobile and I showed you that gusher of the oil, but along with the automobile coming along, there was this wonderful, I get what when I say explosion in small machines, small gasoline powered. I mean, go to Badger Steam and Gas. And all those, they were used to load. I've even saw one where somebody invented one to run a clothes washing machine. So you go start it up and get your clothes washed. Yes, and for boats. There was this whole development in gasoline powered equipment to run electrical generators. Okay. Good. Well, thank you again. Sorry we took so long.
Thanks, Michael. As long as you're alive and kicking and they're allowing me to kind of be in charge of this lecture series, I will be asking you to end the series for us. So we've never had a crowd like this in the museum at least since I've been around here. So that's great. Oh, and the question about the ice cutting, there's an extensive collection of glass negatives at the Sauk Prairie Historical Society, and one of them shows people cutting ice pieces from the river, Wisconsin River, about behind where Ace Hardware is now. And you say, well, you'd never go out there now and stand on the ice because there's a horse out there on the ice. Well, that was before the dam was built. And it used to freeze solid all the way across there. And Earhart, in his chapter on Baxter's Hollow, talks about how the farmers would cut ice at Myers Mill Pond up in Baxter Hollow. And that would be the closest place for those in Sumter here to cut their ice for their ice houses. So, all right, I have a quick announcement. The Badger History Group and the Sauk Prairie Conservation Alliance is combining for a work day on Saturday, May 9th at 9 a.m. You can stay as long as you're willing, and the work will be on the site preparation to allow our easier access to the Savannah area that we want to clear. There's some massive guardian oaks there that really need to be opened up. And it's just south of the Hillside Prairie, if you've ever worked out there. And it is on the former Fred Waffenschmidt farmstead. So you can, and there's very little there that's been excavated so many times out there, but there is still a silo ring on the site there. So, and stay tuned for news of next season series. I'm not sure the format or the venues yet. We might have to get a bigger space. But in the meantime, visit the organization's website and the Facebook page, and we'll try to keep you up to date on that. So thanks for coming, and see you next year.